topics that we mentioned early on. So, all right, everyone, I think we're getting started with the small group discussion. Health data domain, we could take a genomics, those are the two. And then we have a third topic on synthetic data generation, which we first have a quick announcement throughout the talks.
Yeah, so
we have one large room, which is
give
this
you a
one, and
way
then two
to
smaller
find
rooms,
the
I believe.
workshop that Nist is
So
hosting next
just to
week.
determine
now you
the
have
correct
it.
assignment, could you raise your hands depending
we'll
on your
also
interest,
have a
which
recording,
one
so
you'd like
you
to
can't make it
join?
live.
So
you'll be able to get the
how
content.
about we start with the genomics group?
I
Could
cordially
you raise
invite
your hand
to
if you're
join
interested
us,
in it?
and if you hit the register now button, you can see what else is going on in the program
Genomics,
and see if it's of any
health
interest to
data,
you.
and
There's some
synthetic
things about
data.
some security threat modeling
Genomic
that we
data.
did for genomics.
All right.
With Genomics Center,
genomics
this interesting program called Dioptra that might be of interest here. Which
All right.
is,
How about health data?
machine learning?
Okay. Synthetic data.
What would you call it? Like diagnosing machine learning.
So it looks like health
threats,
data is probably the
to various
largest
types
group.
of
So
data,
you can
with
stay
some
here
really neat
if you're
connections
joining
with some
that
other
group, and
programs.
then
So please feel free to join us next week.
synthetic data group can
and
go
that's all for
to
me. Thanks.
223, which should be close by, and then genomic data.
So,
could go to
regarding the
225.
discussion topics, I think we'll broadly stick to the three topics that we mentioned early on. So,
Please
use
try
cases
to
and
wrap up
challenges
discussions
of DP
by
and
11, 20,
health
25
data
or so we have time
domain,
to come back.
genomics,
by,
those are the
11:32. And then we have a third topic on synthetic data generation, which has been discussed a lot throughout the talks. So we have one other quick
large
thing
room,
is
which is
that
this
you
one,
might
and then
want
two
to
smaller
elect
rooms,
a
I
person
believe.
to take notes
to share
just to
the
determine
summaries
the
as a
correct
group,
assignment. Could
all
you
the-
raise your hands
later
depending on your
session.
interest, which one you'd like to join? Any volunteers? So how about we start with the genomics group? Could you raise your hand if you're interested in it? Genomics, health data, and synthetic data. I think we'll get started now with the genomics
summaries.
All right. How about health data? So we have a representative from the health synthetic data group. I think we can start with that. Yeah. So it looks like health data is probably the largest group.
Okay,
so
everyone.
You can stay here for
so
that group, and then
We've got some of the topics
synthetic
we talked
data
about
group
on
can
the,
go
on the board
to
here.
223.
I'll just start from left to
close
right.
by. And then genomic data.
One of the
can go
first
to
ones was
225.
one I brought up, and this comes up a lot in my work at the ICO.
And please try to
quantifying
wrap up the discussions by
re-identification
11,
risk for a
20,
given
25 or so,
deployment
so we have time
of
to come back
DP.
by 11:30.
This isn't just an issue in the health space, but mapping a DP deployment.
One other quick thing is that you might want to
values,
elect a person to take notes to
privacy
share
and so on,
the summaries as a group
to the legislation.
the later session.
That's always a challenge.
any
I
volunteers?
mentioned this yesterday. Leading on from that, establishing risk thresholds, what's acceptable, what would be considered as acceptable for effective anonymization, and how do practitioners communicate risk to stakeholders such as regulators and so on. Following on from that, we talked about use cases, and firstly, which ones are using DP in the healthcare space, the state of readiness for DP, so which use cases perhaps are not yet using DP but would be considered ready for using DP. And equally, those use cases that for reasons such as utility or scalability or so on would not suit well to DP. And we talked about perhaps the lack of DP deployments and the potential for bringing DP in where perhaps they're not used at the moment. Governance was also a big part of the conversation. So we talked about the interaction between researchers and data owners and governance requirements around researchers accessing data, risk profiles as well, and also an interesting one about the risks from DP reprocessing, particularly when experimenting on different parameters before settling on a final choice. and the risks that can pose and how those can be dealt with. Also, a really good point around relaxations of DP, which ones are acceptable under which contexts, and particularly from a healthcare point of view, which ones of those would work well, and whether any consensus could be made there. Have I missed anything from the group? Is there anything that anyone would like to add from the group, or is that pretty well covered? Yeah, cool. Salil?
Also in the group is a question.
Yeah.
Do you remember specific examples under the use cases of things in the different categories that you all found?
I think we invited people to suggest them, but I don't think we actually developed any. But those are categories of use cases. I don't know. Do we actually come up with any real examples?
I think the statistical queries is the most realistic that's being used or being developed in industries. Startup companies.
Statistical queries on health data.
Yeah,
I can tell a bit what we're working on. So it's there is a standard for health data called HOMO, and it's a big push in Europe to get that as a standard. It's about a lot of tables and and capture what happens in a hospital with the patient. Right? So yeah, and there are a lot of statistics that you can derive from there that you can standardize. Standardize from the DP perspective. That's one thing, and the other one is clinical trials. Data sets are pretty standard because that's what you use to report to the FDA. Right? There is one called SDTM, and these are data schemas that I think we could try to understand what kind of analytics we can do to make them. Because those are the standards that we've seen in the hospital being used a lot. The thing is, I low hanging fruit in the sense that, it's not creating models and so on. It's operational.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you, everyone.
One tagline from the session that I particularly liked was that differential privacy research is often not differential private. I think maybe Gary said that.
Yeah, I mean, when we research DP, it's automatically becomes not differentially private, right? If you test multiple epsilons, then you really have to add those. You'd have to compose those. But that's also, I think, how people are doing this in real development environments too, right? And so that gets that question on the board, when and how is DP breaks and relaxation acceptable? We, as a community, we haven't confronted that. And what are the risks that are introduced? Maybe there aren't any risks. If you try 3 different epsilon values, and you say this one is the right utility and privacy trade-off, and you release that one. Is there a risk from having run the private analysis 3 times internally? I don't know. Someone tell me. I'm actually really curious to know.
On that note as well, the part before even using DP around figuring out what your features should be and how you pre-process, deciding on that tends to not fall into the DP domain. So that data analytics part, if you're completely eyes off and completely with DP, I don't know if it's solved to some extent, but it seems like open area for improvements.
Would the synthetic data group like to go next?
Thank you.
All right, everyone. So for those who don't know me, I'm Juan Felipe. Oftentimes just go by my middle name, Felipe. So I was part of the synthetic data group. And we talked about various things. The very first thing we talked about was it started mainly with me with the frustration that I had with the synthetic data community, which was that I don't know what the synthetic data is going to be used for. So I consider myself mostly a theorist, by the way. Like I'm a differential privacy theory guy. So when I'm setting up my synthetic data, I need to create it to do something downstream, at least for to have some utility in mind. And I don't know what that is. And most practically, that means that, let's say I'm reviewing a paper, and they say our method is better because we get a better MOV score, but there's no downstream application. I don't know how to reason about that. And if they do the opposite, they don't report any of the scores, but they have a downstream application and they do better. I'm also kind of like stuck in this weird limbo. And so the first thing we talked about was, what do things look like in practice? And the main feedback I got from the folks in industry, and let's say out there in the real world, compared to me, I don't think I live in the real world. They told me that oftentimes the downstream application is not well defined. And in fact, that's the whole point of synthetic data, is that you shouldn't have to specify the downstream application ahead of time. And, even in extreme cases, which I call extremes, probably the standard case, people don't even know what the downstream application is. They're going to take a look at the data, play with it a little, and then from there, and like what properties they find from the data, they will find a downstream application to use it for. So in a sense, the downstream application is just not defined at all. Which I actually find that to be a perfectly valid answer. In that case, sure, then maybe for papers, if I'm reviewing a paper, maybe I'll care about some combination of, metrics that we all agree on. But also some downstream use case that, if I'm reading a paper from industry and they just say, hey, to be honest, we care about this downstream application for now, and it works better for this downstream application. I think that's perfectly fine. That's something that I learned today about synthetic data. The second thing that we talked about is the kind of call for, first auditing. We actually didn't talk much about auditing, but I do want to shout out auditing. Or, if you have competing methods, some which are differentially private, maybe others aren't. Is there a way to insert canary somehow and audit and get some sort of empirical lower bound? I actually have never seen papers about that. I don't think there are that many, but it'll be really, really cool to see that applied to synthetic data. Let's see, I had two other things I wanted to talk about. Quality control for synthetic data. For those of y'all that are familiar, like the kind of more classical techniques have some guarantee about some sort of marginals. For example, like AIM and M1 are the ones that come to mind that say like, oh, if you care about 1 or 2 way marginals, that we have some guarantee that we preserve that in the synthetic data. But for other applications, like there was one at TPDP where, they serialized tabular data sets and just just tables, and they fed that into an LLM, and they got like synthetic data that looked pretty good actually, but there's no statistical guarantee, right? And so we were thinking about like how do you compare those two types of approaches? So we were thinking of like, instead of like boiling it all down to a single number, saying like, hey, this synthetic data has been certified. It either has some statistical guarantees, or we tried it on these particular applications and it worked pretty well. So like kind of generating a report that comes along with the synthetic data, warning people about what it is and is not useful for, and what we tried out about it. I particularly like that idea. It's just that's a high dimensional problem we're working with here. There's one other thing I wanted to mention, and I don't remember what it is. I actually don't think there was, unless someone here can warn me. Yes, there was one other rant I wanted to go on, which is we were talking about the healthcare application in particular, and Bogdan pointed out that what actually happens in practice is that, let's say, I don't know, let's say one person holds the data and the other person doesn't. They end up just signing a lot of forms, just promising that they're not going to use the data for any adversarial, in any adversarial way. And then they just share the raw data with each other. And in that case, like, let's say we as a community run into a bit of trouble, because if everyone are like signing these forms and then doing some k-anonymity, and then someone is the odd one out and says, actually, I use synthetic data, but then they mess it up somehow. Maybe there's a bug in their code. Maybe they didn't audit correctly or some other reason. They're in a lot of trouble. What I'm trying to say is like there's a lot of risk in being the first person and taking the first steps to doing synthetic data. That's another thing that we talked about. I didn't really voice this opinion of mine, but the people who are brave enough to make that first step are probably in this room. And so that's good news. So it should be a. Where was I going with that? Anyway, yeah. So I'm just saying that I think there's still a niche for synthetic data, in particular for sharing data in ways that were not possible before. But if we're going to approach people that are already signing a bunch of forms and giving each other the raw data and telling them, actually, you should be using synthetic data, it's probably a losing battle. Anyway, I see a hand up. So.
Just real quick, we made that report. So NIST has a tool called SD-NIST that you can use that will give you like 10 different utility metrics for different application areas and types of things, all sourced from like statistical organizations, and a few different privacy metrics. If you Google the Collaborative Research Cycle, CRC, you just Google NIST CRC, it'll take you to a website, it's got everything there. We've got benchmark data, and we have reports on 450 different synthetic data samples, and there is instructions to submit yours. So if you want to run on your benchmark data and get a report, do that, and we'll put your report in our archive so everybody can look at it. But also, you can just use the evaluation tool to see how good your data is. And we had previously worked with a batch of the folks making synthetic data generators, so they've all used the toolkit to help them do their stuff. And we only have this unfortunate thing that nobody knows about it except for the people in this room, and only remember to shout about it every year. So we are hoping to do something more formal and NIST-y about getting the word out about this in the next couple of years. But yeah.
What you said. That's very exciting news. Yeah.
We're working on it.
Yeah. For folks who were in the room with the synthetic data, did I miss something? The silence is good news for me.
There was some discussion that verification services are possibly the future. So that you could share synthetic data set, and we talked a lot that there are no good or robust methods to ensure utility in all cases. But Census has pioneered this verification service that could be response, even though it somehow goes a bit against the spirit, the idea of synthetic data that you share and forget. I thought that was interesting.
Great, guys. Thank you.
I'm going to share the summary from the Genomics group. So at a high level, the main things we talked about, we wanted to come up with a list of potential use cases and think about which ones might be low-hanging fruits. And then we also talked about a few different questions, things that we could work on as a community and challenges for us to address. So in terms of use cases, we somehow came up with 8 of them. So kudos to our group. So just to quickly go through them, building predictive models on genomic data, going from genotypes to phenotypes, use of genomic language models, private model training and inference. And the third one is population-based statistical analysis of things like GWAS, association studies. And then there was a comment on multimodal data analysis using genomics in conjunction with other types of health data, so medical imaging or EHR. There's also reference-based analysis, so using a large population of genomes to improve analysis of specific genomes. Synthetic genomic data generation, including both the DNA sequences and omics data. Supporting queryable databases, so cohort discovery queries, looking up variants. And lastly, multi-institutional collaboration, federated learning involving genomic data. So those are the 8 use cases. So lots of problems to work on. In terms of questions and challenges that came up, so we're thinking a little bit about which of these problems could be low-hanging fruit, and I think the natural answer to that was simple statistical queries, count queries, things like this. And I think there was a similar comment from the health group on this. And we noted that there might be some nuances on this one as well in terms of supporting a large number of queries over a long period of time. There were also some thoughts about how to go about that. And then I think as a group, we noted that there's a range of difficulty in terms of DP applications. So when we think about building models that include genetic variants, we can go all the way from just having one or two most significant genes in the model to having including everything from the genome. So those two are clearly very different in terms of DP trade-off. So I guess one thought is that we could start with the simpler models, and as DP methods advance, we'll be able to handle more and more complex models. There was a discussion on sample size aspect. So for DP to have sufficient utility, we need to make sure that the cohort sizes are large enough. And this is often enough when we're working with biobank scale data sets. But then if we are focusing on specific populations, different ancestry groups, the sample sizes might not be enough, which motivates the use of DP for those cases as well. And then we did have a thought on how the application of DP across different groups might affect them differently, given the different sizes of the groups. So in terms of thinking about problems that we could tackle that can help us get to a better trade-off between privacy and utility, there was a point from Christine about coming up with the right representation for the genomic data. It could be, looking at a subset of genes that are most relevant for the problem. It could also be something more based on ML models. Can we create embeddings that give us a better trade-off? And also, there was a discussion about choosing the right model or working with the right model for the given task. So there are all these classical statistical models, and then there's use of federated learning, which is, I guess, more widely studied, or there are more DP methods for supporting FL workflows, but for certain genetic tasks, it's not clear how FL would be directly helpful. So there's some work that could be done that that turns these tasks in genomic space to be more amenable for these FL related methods that we can better support with DP. And then regarding the multimodal setting, there was a question about how we could best apply differential privacy in that setting. As soon as we add someone's genetic sequence to the model, things become very challenging in terms of DP, but maybe there's a different way of designing multimodal integrative models that help us with the trade-off. And lastly, there was a comment on being more judicious about the parts of the model or the data set that we protect using something like DP. So in the case of multimodal data, maybe we can provide different levels of protection for different types of data depending on the need. And also there was an example from the GWAS context where one of the latest methods in that space from my team is providing protection only for phenotypic data and considering the genomic information to be available to the adversary. So there are different choices that we could make there in terms of achieving practical utility and privacy trade-off. So that's all I had here. Did I miss anything? Feel free to chime in. Any questions or comments?
Use cases are potential cases. Are there any that are deployed?
Not that I'm aware of.
Repeat the question.
Among the 8 use cases, is there anything that's in deployment?
Well, that's what this workshop is meant to change.
Next year.
All right, so that's the end of the session, and I think we have lunch now.
Including remarks.
Okay.
this is, in fact, the end of this morning's session and of the workshop as a whole, with the exception of lunch. Thank you for staying till the end. Thank you for coming the second day. Thank you to all our presenters. Thank you to the organizing committee. Thank you to Amal, who I think is keeping busy somewhere else. And safe travels, or if you're coming to Forks, see you around there. Keep your eye on your inbox probably late next week for some follow-up communications. Thank you so much.
Thanks everyone again for joining. We are, if we are deciding to write a white paper or some sort, we'll reach out.